Hello and welcome to this video on why hydrangeas can be dangerous, if not deadly, when mishandled. Recently, we had several videos on the role of pH on colour change and better performing bonsai. One of the most common examples used was that of hydrangeas. These are plants that can go from an almost red flower to purple and then blue depending on the soil pH. This may have piqued your interest in trying this for yourself. You might also have heard that hydrangeas can be dangerous, but don't know exactly why. This video will explain why they are dangerous and what steps can be taken to mitigate the risk. The toxic component of hydrangeas is primarily going to be found in the leaves and flowers of the plant. It's a compound called amygdalin, and amygdalin unfortunately releases cyanide when ingested. Cyanide, just about everybody would be aware, is rather poisonous and can cause harm, if not death. Amygdalin itself is classified as what is called a cyanogenic glycoside. Basically, it means that each molecule has a small amount of cyanide held together by a nitrile group. When you have the let's say a nitrile group broken down, this releases cyanide into your body, and that then, leads to cyanide poisoning rather obviously. The cyanide product itself has been isolated and independently labelled late trial since the 1950s, and this is also sometimes labelled with the misnomer vitamin B17. Understand that even though it's called vitamin B17, it's not a vitamin, and it's certainly not a B group vitamin. It is a poison. This is why it can be toxic if you consume it orally, and unfortunately it can happen, most notably with children and animals. Signs and symptoms of hydrangea poisoning in humans at least will depend a considerable amount on the dose the person has received, but at the low end you'll find dizziness, shortness of breath, cramps and circulatory problems, mostly because the heart is damaged, and the heart being damaged prevents, blood circulating around the body. No blood circulation, no oxygen. If you get a larger dose, you might find the individual starts vomiting or has extreme diarrhea, abdominal pain from cells in the digestive tract being killed, dehydration from the vomiting and diarrhea, and depression as the brain is slowly destroyed, and eventually coma. In extreme cases, death will follow soon after. The exact amount of hydrangea leaf isn't known, as it's going to vary considerably between species of hydrangea, and there are many different species. Just about all of them are, however, considered to be toxic, and this is the issue. Every kind of hydrangea out there is at least some degree of dangerous. This is an issue that extends to not just the fresh living plant in your garden. Even preserved, for example dried hydrangea leaves or flowers, will actually have more of the amygdalin in it, and that's because it's been concentrated by driving out all of the water through the drying process. This means that you would technically get a higher dose for consuming the same volume, let's say, of plant that's been dried versus the same volume of fresh plant. The steps you can take are fairly straightforward, and it's to keep hydrangeas out of the reach of most children and pets, as these are the individuals likely to get a dangerous dose, given they are much smaller than your average adult. Also, generally speaking, if you're a younger individual, not handling them at all. You also want to try to minimize the handling of the hydrangea. Now, it's very unlikely you'll get much of a dose getting through your skin just by handling it, but it's always useful to minimize exposure. By minimizing exposure, you minimize any risk attached to it. And then finally, if you're concerned about poisoning for any reason, medical attention is always suggested. This does bring us to the final thing to speak of, and that's hydrangeas aren't really toxic unless you are a small person who eats a lot. You need to consume quite large quantities as an adult, and it's generally you will need to actually eat them, so the handling itself is not a major issue. And that's the key here. Handling is not a big problem, but it's better not to be exposed. And this is also another important caveat. Much like other species where you may not be exposed to much when handling something, you may still be exposed to some. So if you're already predisposed to, say, heart problems, then it's worth not handling them in the first place. Of course, if you want to use them to test other things, that's by all means, go ahead. Just be aware that you should probably take precautions to avoid any unneeded or unwanted interactions, or in this case, side effects. Thank you for watching this video. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please do post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.